Well, I'm going to introduce the last panel of the day. So if I could call on to stage, first of all, we've got Galina Petreva-Miteva, please. If you could come on. Galina is a young farmer from Bulgaria who not only has taken a degree in statistics, but also has done wonderful things in terms of new crops and exciting developments on her family farm. I'm also going to invite on stage Valeriu Steriu, a member of the Chamber of Deputies in the Romanian Parliament. Hello.
Hello.
We've got Rudolf Mögler, who's Deputy Director General at DG Agri from the European Commission, of course. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Faustin Bade-Fossé, who's Principal Policy Analyst and Head of Agriculture and Land Management at the Institute for European Environment Policy. Thank you for joining us today. Well, we've just heard... Oh. There you go, that was a nice welcome. We've just heard from the Commissioner in person, well, he's told us about his view of the future. Does it accord with yours? I'll start with you, Galina.
I was very relieved and happy to hear that Commissioner Hogan talked about the value of farmers to the countryside and the value that farmers create in the countryside, because have you ever felt like the bad person in the room even before you had the chance to say anything? You know, farmers often feel that way because the farming sector in the European Union has been demonized left and right. And the result is that very few people like farmers, and even less people can say exactly why. So it was very encouraging to hear that the service we do not only as farmers, but also from socioeconomic perspective is appreciated, and that an effort is being made to compensate, reward farmers for the efforts they make to not only produce sustainably and produce according to the European Union rules, but also to keep the countryside from depopulation and to create intrinsic goods for society, which are not always tangible, but are vital for the sustenance of our rural areas.
Thank you very much. What sort of... I think that was popular with our audience. Well done. What sort of intangible goods do you mean, just to elaborate a little bit further?
Oh, I can elaborate. That one I can do. For example, as a family, we own 50 hectares of a vineyard, 32 hectares of lavender fields, 10 hectares of rose fields, and most of our work to produce the high-quality grapes and flowers is done by hand. So we are a big employer in the area where we farm, but we also face the problem with labor migration and immigration. So we are the ones that keep the area, the rural area we farm in, alive. The village where my farm is headquartered has 78 permanent residents. The youngest one was born in 1942. There is no pharmacy, no gas station, no convenience. There is one convenience store which also operates as a cafe. And the mail arrives twice a week. If we were to leave, I think this village, and I'm afraid to say it, but this village will not go to a better future. It will just decline further. So we are the ones that essentially keep the roads clean in the winter. We are the ones that support the church. We are the ones that run local life out of necessity in order to keep the last and the few remaining residents there. And that's intangible, but it's vital, and I'm not saying it to brag, but because very few people see this and very few people appreciate this and the effort and the courage it takes to keep going when you see what the reality is.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that insight. I'll move on to you. Valeria, what did you make of what the Commissioner told us, and what are your views about the next generation of the CAP?
Well, it was a very compact speech, and it's very hard to say something after the Commissioner. But definitely, I will try to speak as a former young farmer, and I can say that the objectives, which includes putting more credits for the young farmers in the future CAP, is important. I can say that this, at least for East Europe, is a very important objective. At this moment, looking on the figures in Romania, from 800,000, it's a huge number. I know Romania has a lot of farmers. 800,000 were in 2003 before accession. Today, it's only half of them, despite the great effort that the CAP was doing. There's a lot of money going for the young farmers, for Romania at least. But we could not see more and more young farmers installing or settling an operation like we have in our neighbor country. Why? It's not only the money in this story, it's also the education, the local education, which is sometimes too poor for the kids of the farmer. It's the health of keeping the health of the population. Sometimes you have more easier access to a veterinarian than to a doctor to see what's happening with your father or with your children. It's all the infrastructure, and here it's not just the infrastructure of road, water, and all the sewage. We speak today also about digitalization, about internet. The kids, for continuing the practice of the old farmers, would like to have the same conditions like in the big cities. And in the end, it's coming also with a trust, a confidence in continuing hard work. It's not easy to be calving a cow in the Christmas night when all your friends, colleagues from the university are spending holiday. You have to be there. When I was a young farmer, all the calvings were at 3 o'clock in the night. They were never getting in the program 9 to 5. All these conditions can be even more encouraged for the next generation of farmers. And I found that pointed in the new CAP. I think the document comes every 7 years with a great debate. It's not just the figures, it's the discussion with the farmers. I read that there were 320,000 proposals to adapt it for the next CAP, for this one that we are actually speaking. It spends about 2.5 years between the Commission, between the countries which are getting the presidency of EU, between the Parliament and before it's adopted. And we are in this process right now. We face from the European Parliament about 5,000 amendments. So I think it's a vital document which brings in the end for all the people in Europe, the consumers, the farmers, but not only for them, as Europe is a great exporter. It brings a new perspective, and I'm happy to be part of this. And I will try all time to explain to Romanian farmers, Romanian consumers, to be more optimist. I think one of the reasons why the young farmers were not going more in their business is the pessimism. Yeah. Pessimism of all these stories we heard here. We saw pictures of people having a fire, having a flood, drought, we never hear about the successful farmers. And there are millions of successful farmers. And if the media will present more the success stories, I'm sure more young people will be attracted.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Rudolf, are you confident that the CAP reforms will receive a warm welcome?
I'm confident that, first of all, the Commission has made a proposal which is innovative and which addresses the challenges we are faced with. We are now following very attentively the discussions that take place in Parliament and in Council. And we see that I think both institutions have embarked on the way proposed by the Commission, which is rewarding but also very positive with regard to the end of the process. Despite very difficult discussions that took place in the Agricultural Committee of the Parliament, we got a positive vote on all 3 regulations, which haven't touched upon the main principles. There are changes here, there are changes there. It's being modulated, but I think the principles are maintained, and I see the same tendency in the Council. Now, what is very clear at present is that many of the actors feel that they should know more about the budget that is available. The Commissioner, I think, has made it clear on many occasions that the bulk of the budget is clear, but of course, in the first pillar, there are roughly 4% which seem to be in question, and in the second it's a bit more, expressed in percentages. And so there is a tendency to drag on and to wait and see. We are not particularly happy about that, because we believe that a strong message about the content of the policy, and that the policy addresses the issues of the day, could also be a strong message to those who decide about the money. So in general, we hope that the whole process will proceed smoothly and end up with a good result towards the end of the year. But of course, all this is now in the hands of the co-legislators, and we have to wait and see in a way.
But in terms of the budget's only ever going to shrink, isn't it? It's only ever going to get smaller and smaller. So you're asking people to do more with less.
I think we are proposing a system which is smart enough to allow them to do more efforts on certain aspects than they do now without losing ground. But this requires more targeted approaches. This requires the use of modern technologies and help to the farmers to adjust and adapt to agriculture 4.0, basically. And I think it requires to do away with a lot of red tape that is currently a reason for complaints, basically all over Europe. And the proposal by this new delivery model, I think, sets the ground and has a good potential to achieve that objective. Of course, we need the help, in particular, of member states and their administrations to get there.
And which are you more worried about? Are you more worried about the reception of the reforms among farmers, or among environmentalists, or among consumers?
The CIP has always tried to strike a balance. We cannot just work for farmers, we also have to see what is the repercussion on consumers, and we have to look at the society at large. And I think one of the lessons to be learned from the debate that has taken place so far is, maybe addressed to the farming organizations, is that they have to listen to the society at large and make sure that the concerns of the people are taken on board in the policy. The proposal, I think, has prepared the ground for doing that, and now we need to get that done.
Thank you for that. Faustine, what do you make of what you've heard so far?
Well, thank you. First of all, I hope I'm not going to mute myself, because I have the mic thing in the back, and if you see me making some strange moves, that's just because of that. Well, what I take from what has been said is one message in particular that was about, we can't get this wrong, because otherwise we won't be able to justify that policy in 2027. And I think that it's important to remind ourselves here that the statu quo is no longer an option. No longer an option. Why? First, because science is unequivocal. There was a lot of discussions about climate this morning. I don't need to come back to the figures there. It's a major threat to farming. Farming is also contributing to that. We know that. We also have major issue with biodiversity. Actually, we tend very often to see climate, it's very high in the political agenda, and biodiversity gets somewhat hidden by the climate agenda, but we are also faced with the biodiversity crisis. There was this report, this scientific global review that was published in February this year, which showed that insects could actually go extinct in a century if we continue producing the way we produce. We also have issues with water resource. And obviously all of that is a major threat to farming itself. It's a big problem for farmers themselves. So why status quo is also no longer an option is not just because science is unequivocal, but it's also because civil society is actually calling for changes. We all have seen the next generation in the streets calling for changing. They're not just in the streets screaming for changes, there are also some of them. We've seen that in France, for instance, are actually starting attacking their states in front of the court for inaction when it comes to climate. So civil society is there also calling for changes. We also need to look at what has happened with the current policy. What does the greening tell us? What lessons we learn from it? Obviously, there were some issues with the content, the one-size-fits-all, etc., but there was also some issue with governance. Flexibility has proven to be an issue. member states tend to go for the lowest common denominator when it goes to the environment. And that's something to remind ourselves when designing the future policy and discussing it. So on the paper, the Commission seems to have taken on board some of these issues, and this new focus on results, this change from compliance to results, the fact that member states can actually take a step back, really do this needs assessment, look at the first pillar, the second pillar in a more coherent way is all actually very good. But as always, unfortunately, the devil is in the details. And there are many things that actually need to be fixed by the co-decision makers in order to make that proposals actually work and not to continue with status quo that is no longer an option on the table. Several things that we have highlighted recently in our analysis. On budget first, it's very unfortunate that, Commissioner Hogan was describing the eco-scheme as a tool that could help for transition, etc., but there is no ring fencing attached to it. So it's very important that there is some money, at least 30%, because this is what we have for greening now, if not more, for the eco-scheme. We need to have a much stronger governance. Objectives should be articulated in more concrete and quantitative terms, grounded in the regulation, especially when it comes to climate. We need to have clear targets. Accountability is very important as well, especially because we've seen we had a problem with flexibility. So we need to make sure that flexibility is not misused. Otherwise, it will be a serious missed opportunity, but not only. And advice and knowledge are also fundamental. It should not just be telling the farmers the what, but also the why. And that's extremely important because this is not often something that is seen as important in the policy, unfortunately, and the advice and training is key for the change in mindset. Overall, we should also remind ourselves that for the new system to work, we really need member states to embrace it, and we need member states to really have that change in mindset, which is not going to happen like that, needs some training, needs some efforts, needs the environmental authorities to work hand in hand with the agricultural authorities at national level, etc. And just to conclude, unfortunately, what I've seen in the Parliament and in the Council, I'm not as optimistic as the Commission on that. And it seems that we tend to have a repetition, unfortunately, of the discouraging experience we had with the last reform, which led us to a policy that is not delivering. And I think that, because anyway, it will be for the new Parliament to decide after the elections, whatever the new Parliament decides, and whatever the Council decides, I think not securing the sufficient level of environment and climate ambition in the future CAP risk being seen as an unforgivable political failure in the eyes of many, and in particular in the eyes of the next generation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Is there a danger, though, that we're trying to do too much through a single policy? I mean, the Common Agricultural Policy covers so many bases. Would it be better to have a more streamlined CAP than try to be everything to everyone?
But, I'm not sure about your question here, but I think, as I said, what the Commission has proposed would allow member states to somewhat take a step back and really, first of all, in theory, they have to do a needs assessment and to see what their needs are. But this needs assessment needs really to be grounded in science, needs to be scientifically robust. And on the basis of that needs assessment, then they would need to identify which are the best measures, be it in Pillar 1 or in Pillar 2, that would respond to their needs. And it's very, very important to try to have that coherent vision between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. What we have seen with the greening last time around is that there was no rationale between what was decided for the greening in Pillar 1 and what was decided for environmental measures in Pillar 2. While initially the Commission had thought of something that was a pyramidal system where things will build upon each other, but that never happened.
Thank you for that. Galina, I'd like to ask whether you think that young people will be encouraged into farming by what they hear.
For many young people, and I'm speaking from experience, agriculture is associated with long low-income drudgery and poverty. So consequently, agriculture is widely considered an unattractive vocation, and many young people do not view it as an option for a career. I have to admit that I was one of those young people myself. I studied econometrics and statistics and wanted to work in a hedge fund. I never thought I would be a farmer. And actually, I'm here today to tell young people that farmers can be successful, innovative, they can work a challenging, interesting, and profitable job, and they don't have to be losers to qualify as farmers. You can be a rock star in your own field and still decide to be a farmer, and it's not a vocation only suitable for people who are not good for anything else. So farming is a great job. It's full of opportunity. It offers you many ways to achieve a goal, and it can be sustainable, it can be respectful to the environment, it can be all of the things that Faustine said, and also all of the things that the Commission wants to do, but it has to be compensated, balanced, and respected by society. Otherwise, I see no way for young people to decide to be farmers.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm going to open up to questions from the floor at this point, because I'm sure you have many questions about the next generation of the CAP. I've got one that's come through on social media, which is quite a specific one, but I'm going to put it to you, and if someone would like to take it on. We're being asked about agriculture on drained peatlands. So farming on peatlands that have been drained in Northern Europe is responsible for about 20 to 30% of all carbon dioxide emissions, according to the Wetland Products Foundation. So we're being asked whether direct payments for farming on peat is actually making the situation worse. Do you think that's the case, Rudolf? Is that a problem that you've looked at?
Wetlands and peatlands are indeed a very important aspect, and that's why we have put a specific measure into the conditionality in our proposal. Now, as far as I can see, this doesn't seem to be as popular among member states and Parliament. So I think there is a discussion to be had about that topic, and that it should stay, and that farmers should have obligations to meet, to preserve wetlands and peatlands as a very important carbon sink, and also probably as a very important area for biodiversity. That's no question.
Okay, so we should be supporting that.
We should be vigilant, and we should continue the discussion with those who think that this is maybe going too far.
Thank you for that. Would you like to come in on that, or is that?
Well, I think it's just an example where the co-decision makers, unfortunately, as I said, seems to be repeating a bit what has happened last time around, and watering down what has been proposed. So that's why I don't share necessarily the views of the commissions on that point in particular.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That was rather a specific question, but I think we've answered it. Thank you. Now we had, could we have the microphone there, please? And then I'll take you, and we had, yes, here as well. I'll take this question first, please.
Hello. Thank you. Harriet Bradley from BirdLife Europe, nature conservation NGO. Just a quick comment to start with. I think it's very easy to kind of try and make generalizations about the farmers or agriculture or whatever. No one ever says the farmers are this or the farmers are that. The problem is that in Europe we have had trends which have been going on since the beginning of the CAP towards intensification. These are still going on. Farms are becoming more and more consolidated. We're losing millions of farmers. Very, very rapid rate. At the same time, obviously, the biodiversity is dramatically plummeting, and we're contributing to water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So it's not really about saying a sector is right or wrong, it's saying what are the problems what are the forms of farming which are good, and what are the forms of farming which are damaging not only to the environment, but also to the long-term profitability of farms in the long run and the sector. So we're all in this together when it comes to addressing the problems that are the existential problems that are facing humans and the planet. But my question would be a specific question on the policy, which is that we welcome all the talk of the move towards a more results-based system. What do you make of the fact that the Agriculture Committee in the EU Parliament is proposing to have a minimum of 60% of Pillar 1 still going towards direct payments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. And the question there also taking into account the intensification of farming and the suggestion there that some farms are good and some bad. Are you a good farmer or a bad one, Valerio?
I would like to elaborate on this one because Romania was really joining later in European Union, 2007. At that time, we were coming with a very fragmented farming and at the same time, early stage for the new consolidated farms. So we can look 12 years later that we still have both, it's half of the country, especially Transylvania and part of the east side, which is very fragmented. We speak about 1-2 hectares per farm. The average of the whole country is 3.6 hectares, but in the south we have farms doing 60,000 hectares, one of the biggest in Europe maybe. All of them are at this moment supervised. So we can see the maybe best biodiversity in Europe, in Transylvania, where we have the small farms. It was recently, we spoke about the botanist of Prince Charles, saying he could never meet such a biodiversity in the whole Europe, and especially comparing with UK. And we face more and more problems, that's true, with what is happening in the south, where all the technologies and the ambition to be #1 in corn, #1 in wheat, to be the basket bread of Europe is standing to be very visible. What I hope will solve this is, from the new CAP, all that the Commissioner said, the incentives for the farmers, and why not the strategic plans? Because with the strategic plan, really you can put the objectives inside your country, and you can compensate parts which are not that productive, and you can really start to move a little bit the fight with the nature, which started to be in the big farms. This keeps us, at this moment, from developing the country. If we look on the infrastructure, we are more and more fighting with the NGOs which are willing to keep the largest population of beer in Europe. It's so large that sometimes we find fights between the bears and the human. We also face maybe the scariest swine fever that came out because Romania has all the wild pork, and that was spreading a lot of swine fever in the contact with the small householders which are growing pork. So all of them are at this moment going more at each member state to develop, to move, to supervise, to propose itself the objectives. I'm really willing to see how fast this can start. I'm also, like you said, not that optimistic with the new European Parliament to be approved fast, but definitely 2021 must come with the first strategic plans adopted, so not to sit on the actual situation, and to start to look more and more on environment and consolidating the biodiversity and improving it. It was very impressive, the soundscapes presented today. That gives really a big picture on what happens on this earth.
Yeah, that was lovely, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rudolf, would you like to come in on that question as well? Are you encouraging intensification?
Generally, but maybe this is the pragmatic approach of the Commission. I think that we have to pick up the problems where they are. It's very nice to look back and say what has gone wrong in the past, but it does actually not help. And the proposal tries to do exactly that. And at the same time, I think it's important to strike a balance between the interests of the different actors here. When we say, for example, that we should help farmers to be competitive, to have market-oriented and competitive, this of course requires to help them financially. But what we also have been trying over the years is to improve the situations of the farmers in the food chain by creating some exemptions from competition provisions to make sure that they can group together and work together in a more efficient way, by passing a directive on unfair trading practices, which would shield them and their cooperatives a bit against unfair practices that they are faced with by, in particular, processors and retailers. And we would like to go on by creating more transparency in the food chain. Just one example. Another example would be helping them, I spoke about Agriculture 4.0, embrace new technologies, which can help reducing the environmental impact on the land by, for example, using fertilizers in a much more targeted way. And basically use all these tools and possibilities, bring them together into one picture and make sure that things become improved for the future. Just one last remark. It was mentioned in the beginning, I think you did that, of course, help is needed for young farmers to come in and that farmers should be encouraged to start farming. I think the most important aspect for a young farmer to decide in favor of farming is that he sees a livelihood of what he's going to do. This you cannot achieve just by a little top-up to direct payments and by an aid measure for building a stable or something, but he needs to have the confidence that over time he will make his living out of farming. And therefore it is important to make sure that, of course, all the environmental aspects are respected, but at the same time he needs also to be able to make money with what he's doing, and that's the other side of the coin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Great. We had a question. I think the microphone is here, so yes.
Thank you. My name is John Bryan. I'm from the European Economic and Social Committee and an Irish farmer, and I spend a lot of my time protecting the environment. But today was to be about generational renewal and new farmers. And I think very much what Galina has said. If we want to get farmers, young people interested in agriculture, the image of farming is very important. And I would have to say I thought this conference today was over negative. Very clearly, over 50% of the people employed in agriculture in Europe, a lot of them in remote regions, mountainous regions, depend on pasture farming. Most of that farming is high nature. It produces what I call the circular economy. Sunshine, rain, animal protein to feed people across the world. But yet all day we had people here saying, we'll go down the Lancet report. And clearly several people have said, any move down to the Lancet diet would result in a huge loss of biodiversity. Certainly half the land in the world, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Scotland, or whether it's, if we abandon pasture farming, there's several good examples. In Spain, when the sheep left the mountains, we had far more fires. In Scotland, all the biodiversity got lost after the foot and mouth. So I think a balance, and I agree with Fosta here, that we have to work together, farmers and environmentalists, but we need greater balance. And I felt that was lacking here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I think that was a very strong observation. I'm going to treat that as a statement. Thank you very much. And our panelists can take it up in a moment if they wish. There's a gentleman here with a question. And at the back, we've got another question.
Thank you. Ariel Brunner from BirdLife Europe, an environmental NGO. So first of all, given the fact that nobody answered my colleague Harriet, I will repeat her question about the proposal to ring-fence the bulk of the CAP to direct payments, which are basically dead weight investment that instead of promoting the innovation, the environment, the rural development, all those nice things, is just locking farmers into business as usual when all the statistics are telling us that business as usual is a nightmare. So what do you think, because this is being proposed by the Agri Committee? I would add to it, what about the proposals from the Agri Committee, and I'm afraid most of what is being proposed by the member states in Council, which are all about removing any controls, any checks, any accountability from the Commission proposal. The Commission proposal is basically based on, we give the member states the money, we give them the objectives, and then they will find a way forward. Now, that only works if it comes with very strong accountability. You do what's right for Romania, But if you try to rig the system, someone in Brussels can come and say, no, 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 you give the money back. If that is not there, all you are doing is distributing the money around Europe. You'll get corruption, you'll get cronyism, you'll get waste, and you'll get the end of the common agricultural policy. So, two questions. One, why ring-fence the money for the stupid subsidies rather than for the intelligent subsidies? And two, why weaken the accountability, which means more leverage for politicians to rig the game and less chances for citizens and farmers to get the policy they deserve. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that. Some very good questions there. I'm just going to take another couple of questions while I can. So could we have the microphone there, please? And there was a question at the back here. Yes. Hello. Hi.
Hi. I just want to ask the panel, on my North Wales farm, the agro-environment scheme works out that about 90% of the income of our farm is subsidies and agro-environment schemes. If I was being brutally honest about it, the best way for the farm to make money would be to have as little stock as possible, for me to do as little as possible and sit there and let it come in and let it become a almost like a nature reserve. And I want to ask really, how do we then balance food production and continuing farming in these areas, producing high quality, very free-range meat, and continuing farming in the traditions in those areas, whilst also delivering on the environmental outcomes? I think I can see it polarizing even more, where we'll have areas that are just for environment and areas that are just for productivity. And I think that's where we will lose that really important combination of agriculture and conservation. Plus, I'd like a job. So if you could answer that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for that intervention. And we have I think this is going to be the final question. Yep, unless anyone is going to stop me. There you go.
Hi, my name is Sidi. I'm from Ghent University. I'm a cinnamon researcher, actually from Indonesia. Well, 85% of the cinnamon worldwide is coming from Indonesia. Well, I've been doing this approach with the ministries and also with the local government and also with NGO from Belgium to do enhancement or engagement to the farmers to enrich their capacities to meet the European standards for the health conditions, also for the AHCP. But currently, we have targeted to become successful for the farmers in this coming years, but when we try to provoke them to do better, and suddenly the price has changed for the cinnamon, and now the buyers from Europe are buying from Vietnam. So it's difficult for us to strengthen the farmers if actually the price, we are trying to do the best to meet the standards, but suddenly it's shifted from Indonesia to Vietnam. Can you maybe give me an answer how can actually CAP safeguard for the products from Indonesia in the European market?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that perspective as well. I'm going to take our final comments in answer to those questions. I'm going to come this way down the panel. So Faustina, I'm going to ask you first. You don't have to answer every question, but if you could.
Sure.
Yep.
Well, I think BirdLife was trying to get a response from the Commission, but I'm happy to respond as well, of course, and from the other panelists, of course. Well, I think I said clearly at the beginning of my statement that statu quo is no longer an option, which means that obviously the 60% ring fencing proposed by the Comagri is worrying and is an issue, especially in light because one could say, but now it's called basic income for sustainability, I think, but the fact that they are on the side also undermining the eco-conditionality, removing ecological focus areas, etc., makes it even less defendable. And it's particularly a problem vis-à-vis the potential of the eco-scheme that was presented by Commissioner Hogan as a tool that could really help the transition could be the future. If there is no space left for the eco-scheme, then we're not going to have that transition, and we're not going to move away from that status quo that is leading us directly to the wall. And obviously, on the point on accountability, I also said a few about that, and I'd like to, again, stress what Commissioner Hogan said at the beginning of this panel, that in 2027, there is a risk that if we don't get this right, then there will be no more budget. If accountability is not strong, if we have a policy that not only is being watered down, but leads us backwards to where we are now, there will be no more justification.
Fair enough. Quite right, thank you very much. Rudolf, some of your subsidies are stupid.
There should be somebody on the podium from the European Parliament and from the Council to answer these questions, because we have proposed something different. As regards the 60%, what I saw in the Parliament was that there was really a discussion about that. So, I mean, this has now been voted in the Agricultural Committee, and we have to work with that. We didn't propose a percentage because we believe that in a system that is based on subsidiarity, we should allow member states, on the basis of a needs analysis and the SWOT analysis, to come to their conclusions. And what I see, for example, is that there are member states that would like to go further down than the 60% and shift money around into eco-schemes. This is there, and with a 60% threshold, we would prevent them from doing so. So that's a question. At the same time, the same committee has voted a 20% minimum share for eco-schemes. Now, some may say it's not 30%, as we currently have, but when you look at the outcome of greening, you can hardly say that it accounted for 30%. The effects were, unfortunately, because it has been undermined so much in the legislative process, much lower. So I think if 20% was the outcome of the discussions, it would not be a bad result, put it that way. It's maybe not the desirable one, but it wouldn't be a bad result. As regards accountability, I think it's more or less the same. We have proposed a strong system of accountability, and we have to, as a Commission, certainly to fight for that. At the same time, the Parliament is not going down the road the Council is doing. So they want really to keep it up, because there is a completely different interest in the Parliament compared to that of the Member States. So I think we have all the conditions there for an interesting negotiation and the interesting trilogues on these questions. As regards the question of this gentleman here from Indonesia, I think, I cannot really give you or answer you positively as regards the CAP, because the CAP is really an internal policy in the European Union. This would be, first of all, a question of trade agreements, and then, of course, a question to what extent the European Union could influence the behavior of economic operators that would usually buy on the world market on the basis of economic conditions and financial conditions. So this is very, very difficult for us to influence. And the only area, I think, where something could be done would be in the framework of trade.
Thank you. Thank you for that view from the Commission, and we'll have the view from Romania.
Yeah, I will try to be short, because I know we are running out of time, but I confirm the accountability is a serious problem. And at the same time, I can say, again, more as a farmer rather than a politician, farmers are nervous when you change fast all the new system. We speak with the strategic plans, a change from the Commission and the European Union to the member state. If the member state goes with a very big revolution over the farmer, then it's a problem. Then you have a big mess and you start to lose part of the objectives. So I'm focused to keep as much as possible the push on the administration to do it properly. I know the administration has to provide some clear answers, and I trust that the farmers will prove a great accountability on what they receive. From that money, we know also how to improve the policy in the future.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Galina, to you the final word.
The final word. I don't consider the CIP a stupid policy. On the contrary, it's the financial tool, the only tool that we have and the only security that we have in increasing climate changes, turbulences, internal and external pressure. And I think that if society expects us to farm not only for profit, but for the achievement of the multitude of goals that we have set, we have to have the CAP. We cannot farm without it and deliver everything that is on the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much indeed. You've been a wonderful audience, and my panelists are going to leave now, and we'll leave you to our chairman to wrap up. Thank you very much. Thank you.